interesting little film. And one of his gags was he'd get dressed up in a suit and tie, and he had a friend of his who had a limo service. Now, this is 40 years ago, and the only people who drove in a limo then was either the Pope or the Rolling Stones. It wasn't Joe the Butcher like now, you know. Some girls graduating from grade 6 and they put her in a limo, you know. So he would get dressed up in a suit and tie and have his buddy, he'd pay him $20. It cost him $20 an hour to rent the limo. So he'd rent the limo for 2 hours for $40. He'd get up in a suit and tie and drive around the outskirts of East York or parts of Toronto and pull up to a bus stop. And there'd be a pretty girl, "Hi, darling, power of the wind, would you like a lift to work?" "Sure." So he'd drive her to work, get her phone number, and go around picking another 10. He'd pick up 10 girls in those 2 hours and get 10 girls, all pretty girls, and he would talk any of them into bed. And of course he'd show up and they'd say, "Well, where's the limo?" "Oh, it's in the garage." I'd have to take the TTC. So that's the kind of con man Paul was. He was brilliant, you know. And one of the lines that's in the sequel is that he'd give you the shirt off his back, except it was the shirt he stole from you the week before.
Is there anybody who can get this guy here? Is he still around?
Well, Paul died in 2003. He had a serious drinking problem.
We can provide him.
But there's millions of stories about him. You know, he's just wonderful, wonderful character.
Nancy, were you done with the questions? Or can you go ahead?
What's your suggestion for someone who wants to start making a film now? Is it a joke? I mean,
what advice would I give?
Yeah. What do you think the best point that someone should have in mind?
I don't know, because the scene here now is so deadly. I mean, we haven't made Canadian films that have been huge successes. There's been a bunch that have gone to festivals, and most of them I find pretentious. So there hasn't been popular successes here. I mean, there have been in Quebec, but in Quebec they make the sort of Pepsi comedies, you know, that they did for years, which are basically the same kind of comedies you see throughout a lot of the part of the world, from east and south of Suez. You know, it's like very, very fundamental, cheap entertainment for people. So they had a built-in market for that in Quebec, but we never tapped into that here. We just haven't made good mainstream commercial films. And I don't mean by commercial, I don't mean Prom Night 7 or exploitation films. But there's lots of wonderful films that have been made around the world that we could have made here, and we haven't. And we've made a lot of sort of pretentious art house films, which I really can't abide. And the audience has turned off them. And so if you're starting, and it's no easier for me to make a film now than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Nor is it any easier for me to make it now than anybody else. The only difference is now, because you can make the films cheaply. But the problem with that is that everybody can make a goddamn film. Now, instead of having 100 films out there, of which 95 of them were not very good, you now have 5,000 films out there, and there's 5 or 6 of them are good, and they get lost in the haystack. So, you know, it's a bad scene that way, I think. And getting producers to read scripts in Canada is very difficult. I just don't. I don't have a very optimistic view of it. Fortunately, now you can, find a simple story that has a plot. I mean, one of the few Canadian films that I really liked a lot was a film called Parsley Days, made by a young girl from Dalhousie University in Halifax. And it was distributed about 10 years ago, and it got some press. And it's a wonderful film, a very sweet film, about this girl who gets pregnant, and her girlfriend says, if you eat lots of parsley in all kinds of ways, you'll have a natural abortion. Well, what makes the film work is its plot, because her boyfriend is a guy who has a little shop on campus, a little sort of kiosk, where he's called the King of Condoms. Well, he doesn't work in a hardware store. He doesn't work for a bank. he's got a store called King of Condoms. Okay, so if he's got a store called King of Condoms, and his girlfriend is pregnant, ergo, it ain't his fucking kid. Right? And that's where the film takes off. It's not his kid. And now, that's how all they resolve that, and this other character who comes out who is the actual father, blah, blah, blah. But with most Canadian films, the guy works in a hardware store. One doesn't clash with the other. There's no drama there, you know? And you need that drama to make a film. And I guess the best thing is, the cheapest way to make a film, of course, is to write one. Then hopefully you'll find some producer or director who'll want to make it, because it doesn't cost anything to write a screenplay.
Okay.
You know?
I got about 10 minutes and a half. 4 people on the list. So if you can all either limit the questions or limit the answers, I would really appreciate
Okay.
it. Thank you. Now it's cool.
Okay, I have 3 short questions. How did you choose the story? This is my first, because you're the first one who's making an English movie. So how did you choose the story? Did you think about homosexuality at that time to talk about this subject, or you even?
Well, in a way, you don't choose the story. The story chooses you. It's a kind of a two-way street. You have to, you know, sometimes I send scripts to producers and they say, oh, I'm not interested in scripts about baseball. Or I'm not interested in this kind of script. Or I'm not interested in that kind of script. And I want to throttle them. So the only thing I'm interested in is a good script. I don't care if it's about some guy fucking a butterfly. I want a film that has drama and it's about a good script. And the first thing you've got to set up is a sort of rules that will enable you to find script that has a dramatic thrust to it. And then you follow that impetus of where the drama leads you. So in a way, you're starting the story, but also you're following it. Like a lot of writers will say, oh, well, I just start writing and I go wherever the characters take me. So it is a two-way street. You have to let the characters take you, but you also have to have it set up in a way that the characters are in conflict with each other. I mean, The Godfather is a fabulous film, and it is because it's about an innocent guy who's not part of the mob becomes corrupted. And that's what makes it drama. The innocent guy becomes corrupted. But in Godfather 2, all he does is the corrupted guy just gets more corrupted. It doesn't work nearly as well, despite there's a lot of brilliant scenes in it. But it doesn't have the thrust of the brilliance of the original film, because you follow this guy and this story about how he becomes from the guy who's innocent of this business and who takes over, and he's better or worse than his father was. And that's a dramatic story. So it's a two-way thing. But you have to know and instinctively know what will make a good story. And you can make a good story out of a coffee cup if you know how to tell the story.
I got a short. I think, was your name Farzad?
Farzad, yes,
yeah.
very short.
Go on,
I
sure.
grew up with your movie. I watched it during the time there was nothing on cable. I was forced to watch it since the late great news, and every time I have this question, that opening when you're filming the street and you're filming the road, the street, the lines. At that time, how did you do it? How did you do it? Is it trade secret? Every time I had that question, and this is a rare privilege, if you can share with us. How did you work the road where you... How?
Carol Ballard, who is my friend, came up and shot the first couple of days of the film, and a lot of the road stuff Carol and I shot together. And Carol, who was a brilliant guy, he painted the flames on the car, you know. And now, of course, to do that shot, it's easy. It's to digitally do it. You just press a button. But in those, so what we had to do was get in the trunk of the car, and you couldn't do it from the front of the car because somebody would get killed. So get in the front of the car and get double perf film, because usually the film was only perfed on one side, so you'd have to get special film that was double perfed on both sides, and you had to turn the camera upside down. And then as you drove away, and you had to do it that there were no other cars on the road, because if there was a car on the road, in the finished product, the car would be going away from you, you know, because you're actually, so you had to do it where there was a gap in the road, and that way you could take the camera and just put it with just this far above the lines with your hands and hold it steady. It's much easier to do it when it's going this way than when you're going that way. If you caught the camera, you could easily be killed. So that's how it was done.
Okay. I want to avoid the people that have asked probably like one question before, so I might put you in as the last person, but I just want to go to Siavash.
I just wanted to talk about some of the improv scenes that were infamous in the movie.
I'm sorry.
Some of the improv scenes that you just found some street performers and just filmed them, and what other parts were just improv?
Well, there was a couple of scenes that were improvised. The one was everything else was scripted. It's just the way the actors performed it, the way it was shot. It gives people the impression that it wasn't scripted, but almost everything was scripted. But I went down to Allen Gardens, which is that park that's on downtown in Jarvis between College and Gerrard one day, and these guys who were Newfoundlanders were in the park singing. And I said, hey, I'll give you $100 if you just stay here for half an hour. And I went and got a hold of the cameraman, Richard, and phoned him up. And I dragged Doug and Paul out of bed. I said, you got to come over here. And they came over there, and they just improvised, because that was their training with those guys. And then these two derelicts came along, and the guy throws his bottle away, and etc. All that just happened. But I immediately recognized that it was because of the way the guy sang the song. It was very plaintive. The Sing Me Back Home, which is a very well-known country song. Like, I didn't have any clearance of any of the music, which was crazy as well. So I just recognized that there'd be an interesting scene here.
Did you? Can I do a follow-up?
Sure, go.
What about the bar scene where both of the main characters are really drunk? Did that, how do you make an actor, conform to the rules of the script if they're really happy as they were in the bar scene?
The bar scene, you mean?
Right, in the bar scene they go to the washroom, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you were mentioning that they were really drunk, right?
Paul was drunk. Doug was just acting.
Oh, okay.
Paul was always drunk.
All right. There's a question here from Mehdi, and then we'll go to Majid.
Well, I was wondering, I know a year before this movie, there was a John Schlesinger Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah.
With a very, very similar story and plot. Just wondering if any influence from that movie and you when you're making this?
No, actually, I shot this film in 1969.
Okay.
And so that film came out, I think, right in the middle of me shooting it. One had nothing to do with the other. It got compared to that a lot, and especially by the American critics, and everyone voted for Going Down the Road as a
Well, it's not just
film.
the outline of the plot, even the details is very similar.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, and I think that whenever you think you've got some original idea, somebody else there somewhere on the planet is having it too, and so that happens a lot of times. That you think, I have a writing partner in England, and we worked on for 2 years on a script. We thought, well, no one's going to want to make this film, and it was we had taken 2 of the Leatherstocking Tales, The Last of the Mohicans, and The Pathfinder, and molded into a film of its own. Both books written by James Fenimore Cooper. Well, we've got this. We just had the script finished, and the next thing we find out that it's coming out next week with Daniel Day-Lewis, so somebody else had the same idea. So it just happens that way. But this film came out during the middle of my shooting. It had no influence on me one way or the other. It's just coincidence.
All right. Majid?
So I want you to elaborate a little bit more about this kind of, so you say you like movies that have drama, and somehow the Canadian movies doesn't seem to have it, even though there is this big American, U.S. country that tends to produce these very dramatic movies that sell very well. So what is in Canada that the industry doesn't seem to be able to kind of produce? Is it something in the water, or is it because of the way the industry is kind of working? Is it maybe the national film?
I have no fucking idea. Fighting this for 30 years.
We just have to edit all these things on the camera as well.
Yeah.
Make sure that it's going to be put on the website.
No, that's one of my big complaints, you know. I mean, a film that I talk about a lot is a film probably none of you have seen called The Defiant Ones. It's not a great film, but it's a great talking point. But it's a film that this guy Stanley Kramer made in 1960 or something like that with Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier. And it's about two guys who escaped from a Georgia southern prison gang. A black guy who hates white people and a white racist. And they're chained together. Now that's drama. Now with a Canadian film, the white guy being a member of the NAACP. You know? And it's and the script is filled with the N-word. You take that out, you don't have any drama. And what this is about is the classic story. It's about two people who hate each other, and then they're forced to work together to escape because they're chained together. So then they come to trust each other just because to save their own skin, and then they come to respect each other, and then they come to love each other in you know, not that kind of way. And they love each other. And then it follows this classic Hollywood pattern, and there's a reason why it follows that pattern, which is boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again. And if you've got a film that's only about boy meets girl, boy gets girl, then she can't get the girl until the last scene of the film. But if he gets the girl in the middle of the film, you got nowhere to go, so he has to lose her. So in this film, finally they're together, and then the black guy thinks he sees a reason why this racist guy has betrayed him. So now they're torn apart. And at the end of the film is the last shot of the film is them coming back together, and they're escaping together, unchained now, on this train, and Sidney Poitier is in the boxcar, and he reaches out with his hand to get Sidney Poitier to bring him onto the train, and they get off and go off into the sunset together. Now, Stanley Kramer is not a great director, but that was a wonderful story that followed that story. There's only 5 or 6 real stories about betrayal and trust and love, etc., etc. But, you know, Canadian films, like the guy that there's two white guys, or whatever, they seem to take away the drama of it. It's like, there used to be this play years ago called, on Broadway in England, No Sex Please, We're British. Well, this is like, no drama please, we're Canadian, you know, which I don't buy for a minute, you know. There's lots of drama here.
I'm going to take the last question, and then there are a couple of people that want to ask questions, but we can also defer that to the discussions, because I don't want to be just empty with the discussions. We can have other people ask questions, or either make that into their opinion. But the last person to ask the question, Cyrus.
There's a scene in the restaurant where the two are sitting, and one of them talks about repetition of life and being very absurd and wanted to have meaning in his life and all that. It was so similar to Albert Camus' philosophy. I was thinking, were you thinking of that when you were doing the scene?
It's similar to
Albert Camus' philosophy of absurdness.
I was thinking much more of the scene in the Glass Menagerie, Tennessee Williams play, about the I've forgotten his name of the character, about how he goes to work each day. And I've forgotten, but it was very beautifully written scene. And this was a scene about this guy who was a dreamer, and he wanted to do something where he left his mark. And that's a scene that's carried through in the sequel, because he wants to write. And he's been a postman all of his life in the sequel. And that's part of his, and it's part of, and you know, and the thing is that it's also part of life today where everybody wants to be a writer. That's why people get on Twitter, you know. I just had toast this morning. Who gives a shit? You know, it's not like the Pope just had toast. So it's a way of everybody wants to be a creative person. Everybody wants to be a filmmaker. Everybody wants to be a writer. Everybody wants to be an artist. It ain't that easy. You know, if you're 5'6" and 120 pounds and you want to play offensive tackle, you'll soon have your head bashed in, and reality will soon hit you in the face. But in the arts, you can say, oh, they don't understand me, or I'm right, and there's no argument about that. It's not like real life. And Pete was a dreamer, and I think that was and that scene was done after the first edit. Actually, I felt I needed that scene there, so I asked Bill to write a particular scene like that. It wasn't in the original script. And it also shows the practical side of Joey. He says, "What are you going on about? We've had lots of good jobs. You're just always you're never satisfied." And that was Pete. He never was satisfied.
Okay, from this point on,